ba 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 ba. There we go. Well, today we're going to start with any questions you guys might have with anything that we've worked up to this point with, maybe involving the embellishments or anything else. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? Totally fine. So what we're going to be working on today is kind of an intimidating concept, right? We're chord theory. And to be honest, we're not going to talk about everything that goes on with chord theory because it's too much to talk about in one little, 30-minute session here on Zoom. People will go to college and study chord theory for entire quarters, and we just don't have that time. So what we're going to be working on today is breaking it into kind of two different levels. One is for people who have never really done anything with chord theory and moving chords on the ukulele. And then we're going to be jumping ahead a little bit to concepts that will make more sense if you understand just a little bit of music theory and things. And so the most critical thing with today's session is that you kind of find that one thing you didn't know before and latch onto that and try to incorporate that into your everyday playing. Because if you try to do all of this stuff at once, it just becomes overwhelming very, very quickly. But let's go and talk about what is a chord. Well, in music, in kind of Western harmony, the way that we think about music theory most commonly, a chord is very simply just a collection of notes played together. That's all it is. And so we have a lot of different types of chords, and all of them are just different notes stacked together and played, and they usually elicit some sort of emotion or feeling with them. The most common types of chords that we experience, especially on our ukuleles, are going to be major chords, and a major chord sounds something like this. Right? And you can hear how it's kind of happy or regal sounding, right? It's a kind of a positive type of sound. And then we also have minor chords as kind of the other most common type, and that sounds like this. It sounds a little bit sadder, a little bit more melancholy. It's, I kind of think of it as like the sun is out and the rain is here. And the reason why I like thinking of it from a weather standpoint is because I don't really like saying happy and sad, because that's not really fair. Because if you hear this chord, you might not feel happy. If you feel this one, you might not feel sad. But I think this one does kind of sound like a sunny day, and this one sounds like a rainy day. But sometimes rainy days are the best days, right? So it's okay for you to like minor chords and for it to make you happy, even though the sound might be a little bit more rainy. But anyways, those are the two most common types of chords, and the ones that we're going to be working with most today. Major chords, which have this type of sound, and minor chords, which have this type of sound. Now, these two chords are examples of what we call triads. And a triad, well, the word tri is three. And all that a trinote is a three-note chord. So what that means is when I'm playing either of these chords, they both have three notes, three unique notes in them. Now, the funny thing about that is the ukulele has 4 strings. And this actually makes chord theory very tricky with the ukulele, because if a chord only has 3 notes, but the ukulele has 4 strings, that means one of those notes is going to get played twice. And that honestly makes things very confusing. And so before we start talking about some of the theory behind this stuff and talking about what makes a chord, let's just kind of take at face value that we know some chords on the ukulele, right? So for instance, let's all play a C chord, which we normally play just like this. Maybe you put your ring finger on the 3rd fret of the A string and you strum through all 4 strings. It's a beautiful sound. It's more of the sunny day type of sound. Now, this and every other chord you play on the ukulele is actually 12 different chords if you know how to manipulate it right. So what this means is this part right here of your ukulele. See, mine's this little white part right here. This is called the nut of the ukulele. And what I want you to do is I want you to take your index finger on your playing hand, and I want you to actually lay it right behind the nut of your ukulele, just like this. So don't go over it, because then it'll dull all the sounds, but go just behind it, just like this. And now what I want you to do is build every chord you know with your index finger here, instead of wherever your index finger typically goes. So let's look at that C chord again. Well, normally we use our ring finger here, but that might be a little bit of a stretch, right? So maybe instead we use our pinky finger. So the pinky finger is here at the 3rd fret, and my index finger is laid across just before the nut, just like this. This is a C chord. It is a C chord because of the notes it contains, and more importantly, the relationships they have to one another. If we move this chord up one like this, and we took every single one of the notes and raised it. You see, my zeros on the G, C, and E strings are now going up to the fret 1, thanks to my index finger, and my pinky finger here at 3 is going up to 4. The relationships between the notes stay the same, right? Because it's 0003 becoming 1114. It's the same relationships. And because they are the same relationships, it is still a major chord. In this particular case, we could call this chord a C sharp or a D flat major chord. Now, if that's overwhelming, that's okay. Just know that, hey, if I move this up one, I'm playing a new chord. And if we try to play it, which, by the way, this is one of the hardest chords to play on the ukulele, it should sound like this. Now, why is it one of the hardest chords to play on the ukulele? Well, if you remember back to when we talked in quarter 1 about fretting, it's really hard to do bars, especially on the first fret of the ukulele. So what helps a lot is get right up next to that fret wire. You can take your middle finger and reinforce it if that helps, and get right up next to them. But man, barring across fret 1 like this, it's not easy to do. But you hear how this is different, yet the same, right? You hear how they're very different, yet very much the same. And if I move up again, and now I'm at 2, 2, 2, 5, this is actually a D chord, which is kind of neat. If I move up again, that's a D sharp or an E flat. All right, you can see now we've already played 4 different chords doing this. We played a C chord, and then we played a C sharp or D flat, and then a D, and then a D sharp or E flat. These are all major chords with different names. And the reason why I said we have 12 different chords here is because we can move this anywhere up the fretboard, and it's not until our finger reaches fret 12 on the bar, which 12, 12, 12, 15. If you can play this, you're a very, very good player, because that's hard. That's really, really hard. I really expected to play this. But if you can go between this zone, if you can do anything from 11 down to 0, you can play 12 different chords. So this is a C chord. This one is a C sharp or D flat. This one is a D sharp or E flat, an E, an F. I know it's confusing. Why is it not E sharp or F flat? That's something we'll talk about another time. But this is an F chord. If we bar across the 5th fret here, add this 8 with our pinky finger, that's an F chord. And when we listen to this, does this sound the same as this? Well, yes and no, right? If you listen, let's try something. Go ahead and play your normal everyday F chord. Middle finger here on 2 of the G, open on the C, and index here on 1 of the E. And go ahead and just start strumming it down and up like this. Sort of a down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, dud. And I'm going to play the high one while you're doing this. I just want you to listen and hear, do these sound good together? So here we go. Does it sound good while I play this and you play that? Absolutely, right? It's a cool sound. Now, if I were playing this chord instead, that does not work so well, does it, right? And that's because now I'm playing an E chord, which is very clearly not an F chord, and that's why they don't really work together, right? Just because a chord is a major chord and another chord is a major chord doesn't mean they work well together, but rather it just means that the intervals between the notes are the same. And what needs to really happen is play the same major chords together to get a good sound. But this F chord is very different than this F chord. And really good players will use different versions of chords to play the same things because it sounds really nice. So if you're ever playing with someone, you're jamming, and they're playing an F chord, maybe try this F chord. Because it sounds so different, and it's such a, interesting, cool sound. At the same time, a lot of people struggle with an E chord, myself included. E is not fun, but I like this E a lot. Just down 1 fret there, so you're barring across 4, adding that 7. I play this E over the other E's. People play like this E. Sometimes they play this E. I like this one. I think it sounds the best and it's easiest to play, which never underestimate the power of simplicity. But that is a C chord. That's also a C sharp, a D sharp, an E, an F sharp, a G sharp, an a B flat, a B, and back to C. It's all these different chords with all these different names, because you just move it up 1 fret at a time. Now, you might be completely overwhelmed by this, and that's okay. This is a lot. This is a lot of information. But if the only thing you take away is, hey, this is C, and if I imagine this finger being here, I can move it up and find different chords, that's pretty awesome. And the trick is, whatever note is on your C string is going to be the chord name. In this case, your C string is playing open. It's a C chord, so that makes this into a C chord. If I make an F note, for instance, here at 5, and I play the same thing, it's an F chord because of that. So if you can find the notes on the C string, you can find some different chords. But let's go and look at another example of this, because this concept works every time with this index finger right here. So let's play another really common major chord. Let's play an F chord. Now to play an F chord, we do this. We were just talking about it, right? 2, 0, 1, 0. Now let's do it with this. So, I can't use my index finger for that anymore. So how else can we build this? Well, maybe my ring finger goes here to the 2nd fret of the G, and my middle finger goes here to the 1st fret of the E string. If you've never done this before, this is tricky. It feels very off. But having that bar with the index just behind the nut, taking that middle finger, adding it to the 1st fret of the E string, and then that ring finger coming up to the 2nd fret of the G string, just like a normal F, just with your fingers flip-flopped. Makes for a tough time, but if I move this, you'll notice this will still work, because it's the same thing as this F chord, right? Just now these fingers have flip-flopped. Again, that's that ring finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, and then the middle finger here on the 1st fret of the E string. And if I move it up 1, it's hard to bar on 1. We've talked about that, right? But that's an F sharp chord. So if you're ever looking at a chart and it says, oh, play an F sharp chord, it might be like, how do I play that? Well, it's just 1 up from F using this sort of concept. Now what's really cool is move up 1 more. That's a G chord. Now, you might not usually play a G this way, but it's a G. Why would you ever play this G over this G? Well, this G doesn't cover all 4 strings like this one does. So if you're ever doing something where you're trying to mute the strings or something like that, playing a chord like this can be really helpful. If we were to move it up another fret, it's a G sharp or A flat, and if we move up 1 more, it's an A chord. So that A chord is kind of neat because the sound of this is very different than the sound of this A down here, isn't it? Right? This is what's so cool, is now you know another 12 different chords as you count up with this F shape. It just keeps going up and up and up. And now you know essentially 2 different ways to play every single major chord just with this and with this, right? Because if you think about it, you can move this one up to wherever you need it, and you can move this one up to wherever you need it. Now, how quick and practical and applicational is that? Well, there's a lot to learn to get comfortable moving up and down. But today, at the very basic level, just get comfortable with barring it, with putting your fingers in those places and trying to count as you go up. And that's awesome. That's something that most ukulele players can't do. But this is why really good players go up the neck, is they're using different versions of the chords because they give you different sounds and different outcomes. Let's go and try another chord. Let's try a minor chord this time. So we've done all that sunny day sounding chords, but here in Seattle, it's pouring rain right now, so I'm feeling more a minor chord type of mood. So let's play an A minor chord. It doesn't get much easier than A minor, right? It goes like this. 2 on the G string and strum through. So let's move it. Well, remember, we got to put our index finger here, which means we got to reformat the fingers a little bit. So that ring finger is what's going to be there on the 2nd fret of the G string. And then when we move it up 1 fret, we're now to B flat or A sharp minor. Move it up again, and we're at B minor. You may have played this as B minor before. You might have already done this and know this chord, but now you know why. It's the same intervals of notes as the A minor, it's just moved up. Now, does this B minor and this A minor sound the same? Kind of, but do they sound good together, right? If I'm playing this while you're playing this at the same time, they don't really sound good, right? They don't work at the same point, but they have a similar sound. Isn't that crazy, right? Chords are funny like that. So we can move this up again, and now we've got like a C minor chord, right? 5, 3, 3, 3. Kind of cool. You move it up 2 more, and that gets you a D minor chord. It's kind of interesting and neat to realize that, hey, I can just move this up. Now, if you're wondering, how do I know when to move this stuff? Like, what can I do, to find this? This is where just going on Google and typing in like ukulele fretboard map can really be helpful, because you can just find these notes and move up and count. And it might take some time at first, but that's how you learn this stuff. It's not meant to be instant. If it were, everybody would do it, right? But that's a minor chord now moved up, right, to be played in different ways. And so using these concepts, we can play chord progressions in very different ways. And it's kind of fun because what if I want to play a chord progression differently than I usually do? Let's say that the chord progression I'm going to play, let's maybe do like an F chord, and then we're going to do a D minor chord. And then after that, we will do a C chord. Well, an F chord is here, a D minor chord is here, and then a C chord is here, right? And that's fine and sounds okay. But what if you want to move it? Well, you could find those other shapes, like we talked about the F going up here. 5-5-5-8 is another way of playing F. Right? And you can hear that that sounds much different. Again, this is using that C shape to move up, right? So it was this one here moving up. So we have 5-5-5-8 just like this. Because it's the C chord moved up to be an F chord. And then I go that D minor. Well, now I'm going to use my A minor shape and move it up to the D minor, which will be here at 5. So we'll have 7-5-5-5. And then for the C chord, this is quite advanced, but I'm going to go up to this F shape on it, which is going to be 9-7-8-7. Whew, that's way up the fretboard. This isn't necessarily easy stuff, is it? But if you listen to this, F, D minor, C, F. This sounds fine, but what if one person's doing this and the other person's doing this? What if you're jumping around? Cool to see how these different chords can be played in different ways. My uke's going out of tune because of all that rain, I think, the humidity. But you can hear how these things sound different yet the same. And just trying to move a chord up and play around with it and create those different sounds can really be a cool, fun tool. And if this doesn't make all the sense in the world and it's a little bit confusing because there's so many things going on, you're not alone. That's sort of the process with this. And it's okay for it to be a little confusing at first as you're working on it. But you can use any chord you know and you can do this exercise with. Absolutely any chord. They're not all going to be easy though. Let me show you one that I really don't like. It works, but I don't like it. Go ahead and play a G chord again. That's why I played at the very beginning of our little lesson here, right? Well, let's play it with this. Like this. Oh my gosh, what do I do? Well, my middle finger is going to come here to the 2nd fret of the C string. My ring finger is going to come to the 2nd fret of the A string. And my pinky is going to cross up to the 3rd fret of the E. This is hard. This is very, very difficult. And honestly, this is just a good exercise in its own right. Play a G chord without your index finger. It'll make you feel like a total beginner again. But take that index finger and bar it there and move it up 1 fret. So now you've got 1 here with the index, 3 here with the middle finger, 4 with the pinky, and 3 here with the ring. If this is tough, again, it's hard. This is a really difficult chord. But there's an A flat. Move it up again, and you've got an A. Maybe a different A than this one, or a different A than this one. But it is another way to play that chord. Even though it's confusing and difficult and hard, it's there. And that's what's so cool about this, right? Is even when it's really hard, it still works. Because remember that a chord is a collection of notes together. And a triad is a 3-note chord, and it's going to be the same collection of 3 notes to create that chord's identity. When we think about the major and minor we just talked about, they're going to have essentially a different recipe to create that sort of sound. And I like the idea of a recipe because think about, like, maybe we'll think of cakes, and then we'll think of, I don't know, meatloaves. This is a weird analogy, but I promise it'll make sense in a moment. Is a cherry pie and a blueberry pie and a raspberry pie, are they all very different from one another? Not really, right? They're all dessert pies. They all have these similar kind of ingredients, at least, you know, but there's these small changes to them. Like if you had a bite of a cherry pie and you had a bite of a raspberry pie, they would taste different yet similar. And that's kind of like major chords. Major chords we can think of maybe as these pies. A C major chord and a D major chord, They sound similar, but they are distinctly different, right? And then with the meatloaf analogy, that's like our minor chords. And you could have a meatloaf that's made out of beef or pork or whatever it might be, or you could have a vegan option too. I don't want to make it all about certain types of food. Anyone else getting hungry? It's going to be the same sort of concept of like, this meatloaf and this meatloaf have different meats in them, but they're still both meatloafs. They still, they're not a pie. They're not going to taste like that fruit pie. And that's how you can kind of think about major and minor chords. Is major chords sound like major chords, minor chords sound like minor chords, and they sound that way because of the recipe that's used to create them. The actual notes that are used might be different, but the relationship that those notes share is the same. And so when you're looking at a chord, if you know any music theory, maybe if you took piano as a kid or played another instrument, you have a huge leg up as you're working on this. So I'm going to start talking about a little bit of music theory now. Just a little bit, don't worry. And so if you've never looked at anything with music theory, it's okay if this doesn't make sense. I recommend, honestly, just going on YouTube and typing in things like basic piano, because honestly, the piano is one of the best ways to learn some music theory. But if you look at a C chord, for instance, I mentioned there are 3 notes in these triads, in these 3-note chords. Well, what are the 3 notes that's in the C chord? Well, this one's pretty easy because we have our G string, so G. We have our C string, so C. We have our E string, so E, and then we have this, 3 on the A. Now, 3 on the A is A sharp, B flat, B, C. It's a C note, and you can hear it's the same note that's played on the C string. It's just an octave apart, which means they're the same note at a different interval of pitch. But what that means is my C note is doubled, and I have those other 3 notes. Well, those are the notes of a C chord. If you have the notes G, C, E, and one of them doubled, it does not matter where you put those notes, in what order, what quality. If those 3 notes are together, you are playing a C chord. So if I were to put these notes in crazy places on the ukulele, like let's say that I take my C note and I put it like right here, put like 8 on the E string, just for fun, right? And then I need let's say I want my G note, and I'm gonna put my G note, maybe I'll do like the open G string. Sure, why not? And then I need an E note. Well, I'll put that E note right here on 7 on the A string. And then my C string hasn't done anything yet, right? But I can double any of the notes. I'll double the C note just for fun. This 0087 is a C chord. And honestly, it's pretty cool, isn't it? Isn't that a wonderful sound? Much more big sound than this, right? I can move anywhere as long as these notes are played. It doesn't matter. I could do some big stretch. As long as I have the notes G, C, E, and one of them doubled, it'll be correct. Now, the way to think about this would be a little confusing. Think G is the first note of a C chord, wouldn't it? So this is where the concept of thirds come into play. And this is the backbone to all chord theory, at least in Western music and harmony. Thirds are how we stack chords on top of each other. So whenever we're thinking about a chord, we think of the root of the chord as being the name of the chord. So in this case, it's a C chord. So the root of the chord, the namesake of the chord, is a C. So we can play a C. It doesn't matter if the C is at the bottom or on the top, as long as one is present. But when we're thinking about it, it is the root, the one of the chord. Now I mentioned the word thirds just a moment ago. Well, let's go ahead and put our thumb as C, and let's count up the musical alphabet to whatever the third is. C is 1, so the 2 would be what? Well, what comes after C in the musical alphabet? It's going to be D, all right? And then the next after that is going to be E. Now the quality of this being sharp or flat, right now we're going to ignore. We're playing a chord that doesn't use any sharps or flats. But that's a whole nother concept as you're learning chord theory. For now, don't even worry about it. Just think of these thirds. C, D, E. All right, so C to E is a third. So the first note of the C chord is the C note. The third of the chord, which is the second note, I know, isn't that confusing? Why do they call it that way? Well, the third of a C chord is E. And those 2 notes together are the start of a C major chord. The next note above that is going to be what? Well, we have C, D, E. So what's the next one? It's going to be F and then G. C, D, E, F, G. The notes of a C chord are the C, E, and G. The 1, the 3, and the 5. The distance between 3 and 5 is also a third, right? If we think of this as 1, 2, 3, it's the same as 3, 4, 5 in terms of counting. And that G note we have right here on our open G string, right? So the notes of a C chord are C, 1, E, 3, and G, 5. The order doesn't matter. In this particular case, it actually works out really well. The C chord on ukulele is really cool. If you're on a high G, but if you're on a low G and you're playing, your G is the low note. Does that matter? No. As long as you have the notes C, E, and G, you're playing a C chord. I could put the C way up high, and I could put the G as my lowest note, and I could put the E somewhere in between. And that's a C chord for the same sort of reason that this is a C chord, or this is a C chord, or this is a C chord, or whatever C chord you want to play. So long as it has those 3 notes, it's that chord. So you can apply this to any chord that you know, especially when they're major and minor, because you know that's going to have 3 notes, and one of those 3 notes will be doubled. Again, it doesn't matter which one. That's why the ukulele is kind of confusing, because there's 4 strings. But let's look at another example. Let's look at an A minor chord. We're going to play A minor. What are the notes of the A minor chord? Well, let's think of it from the standpoint of what should the notes be and see if we can figure it out from there. Well, we're thinking in thirds still, and A minor happens to have no sharps or flats, just like C did, which makes this really good for this exercise. So our first note is A, right? What's the third of A? Well, the second is B, so the third is C. A, B, C, right? And so when we do that, we now know that, okay, the third of our chord is going to be a C note. Do we have a C note in here? We sure do. It's right here on the open C string. And the next note, A, B, C, D, E, is going to be an E note, which we have right here. So we have A, C, E, and we have another A. Doesn't matter if we had another C or if we had another E. Doesn't matter as long as we have those notes included of A, C, and E, we have our A minor chord. It's really helpful to think of it in this 1, 3, 5 format just for consistency. Right now it might seem like it doesn't matter, and that's just because we're working on chords that are pretty basic, no sharps or flats or anything else as we're looking through it. But as you learn more about chord theory and learn more about how to move chords and manipulate them, that format of knowing the 1, the 3, and the 5 is absolutely critical. And I'll tell you right now, when I'm doing an arrangement of a song, or I'm writing a song or whatever it might be, I might see like, I need a melody note to be like, let's say I need this A melody note, or excuse me, this E melody note. And let's say the chord is an A minor chord. Well, I'm going to be thinking, okay, A, C, E. I know the chord of A minor are those 3 notes. I've got an E here. Where am I going to put the other notes? And I might map it in a bunch of different ways, depending on what I'm looking for with my arrangement and other things. And if that sounds overwhelming, that's okay. I've been doing this for a long time to get to that point of fluency, but it's all there for you, right? It's those notes, those names, learning the interactions between them. And right now it just starts with, okay, I'm going to play this chord and move it up a fret. Or I'm going to look at this chord and name those notes in it. Little itty bitty steps are the key to the path of victory with it, but it's all kind of there. Now again, those were just major and minor chords, which are, again, triads, 3-note chords. There's 2 other types of 3-note chords, and they're called augmented and diminished chords. And truthfully, we don't see those very often in music. It's not to say they don't exist, but they absolutely do, but they're just a little bit less common. For instance, an augmented chord sounds like this. You hear it's really dissonant, right? This is like it's raining frogs. Like this just sounds troubling, right? Versus, the rain versus sun. And a diminished sound is going to be more like this. It's very, 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 very dissonant, right? And so they're just a little bit less common overall than that major and minor. So it's a good place to kind of start with major and minor. But from here, what we'll be kind of talking about in our next session is we go into what are called chord extensions. And all that extension is we had that 1, that 3, and that 5. Those are the 3 notes of a triad. The next step would be adding what number? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's why you see 7s all over the place. Why you see C7, G major 7, A minor 7, all these different names with 7. That's why the number 7 is so common. It's just the next step in it. Again, if this feels overwhelming, that's okay. It sure did for me for the first couple of years learning it, but it will get easier as you look at it. And again, try to latch onto one little thing at a time. Get that one thing comfortable and then move on to the next. So I'm going to open it to any questions you guys might have with these concepts. Again, a lot of information and not a lot of time, and it certainly doesn't cover all of chord theory because we'd need to meet weekly for about 2 months to get through all that. But are there any questions that you guys have right now? Yeah, June.
So when you were moving up the fretboard, what is the order? You said C, D, and then you went E, A flat, F sharp. Is that always that same order? And
yeah, so this is a little confusing, right? The best thing to relate to this, I find, is a piano keyboard. And this is why I mentioned the piano kind of early on in the session, is it all lines up with the piano keyboard. So C goes to C sharp and D flat, which goes to D, which goes to D sharp, E flat, which goes to E. Logically, it should go to E sharp, F flat, right? But if you look at a piano, the E and F keys have no key between them. And so there is no E sharp and F flat for this particular purpose. So we go straight to F. And then it goes F sharp, G flat, G, G sharp, A flat, A sharp, B flat, B, and then same deal. The B to the C doesn't have a key in between them. And so this is why it's so confusing with this instrument, because you don't see that at all. Like if you look at this to this and this to this, they look like they're the same thing. But this is F sharp or G flat to G, while this is B to C. Makes it very confusing. And that's why at first when you're learning this stuff, I think just getting comfortable moving up and, trying to identify a couple notes at a time is really important. And that's where, again, different, if you go on Google and type in like ukulele fretboard map, you'll find tons of different things that show those different note names. But it is constant and consistent in all of music with this, and the ukulele is tuned to this concept. The fretboard is made to go around those 12 notes, and that's why we've got 12 frets before it starts back over. Any other questions? No questions? And you can, it's okay to ask multiple questions too. It's but no worries. Cool. Well, again, it's a loaded concept and there's a lot of information here, and I can't stress enough to just try to find that one thing that you can kind of latch onto with it, because if we talked for much longer than this, it can be overwhelming. I mean, it probably already is overwhelming, but it can be even more overwhelming. And I can't stress enough how it's just finding that one little thing that you didn't understand before, start to get comfortable with, and then the next time find that next little thing. And this kind of transcends this lesson. It's really anytime you're taking any sort of courses, it can be so stressful to try to remember every single thing that somebody teaches, but just focus on that one thing that you didn't know before, and then the next time a new thing. And after 10 or 15 times, there's a lot of little things that so thank you guys so much for coming today.
Oh, I did have a comment. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I did find, I thought, just an excellent chart of all the notes that Ukulele Underground had posted. Yeah. And this is what it looks like. I don't know if you could see it. But perfect. I just thought this was just perfect. It just kind of outlines each fret and the note and stuff. So
that's awesome. Yeah, Ukulele Underground is one of the best resources ever for ukulele stuff, for sure. And
not that I've memorized any of this, but, I just thought this was really visual and very helpful. So.
Yeah, well, it's funny too, because people talk about how is it important to memorize that chart, and I say no, absolutely not. Just like if you took a class, like I took classes in high school and college, and some of those classes I wouldn't care about what we were learning at all because it just wasn't relevant. So what did I do? Well, the night before the test, I crammed, and I'd get my B-, and I'd be on my way. How much of that do I remember now today? None of it, right? But at the same time, the teachers that took the effort to actually make you learn something and then give you the reason to learn it, a lot of concepts I remember to this day just because of the way the teacher prioritized learning it instead of just memorizing. And so with those fretboard maps, don't worry about memorizing it. Don't even think about it. Just be able to look at it and decode it and have it there ready. And when you need it, it's there. And as you use it, you'll begin to learn it. In fact, when I started private teaching, I didn't have the fretboard memorized yet. So every lesson online, I'd pull up a fretboard map and I'd have it on my computer screen. And over the years, really, I looked at it a little less and less and less. And then one day I realized I was in a lesson, someone asked a question, I answered the question, I stopped the call, and I realized I never even opened it. Like I didn't open the map. And it wasn't just like a aha moment, I don't need it. It was, oh, I haven't been using it in a while because I learned it. I didn't memorize it. So don't stress over memorizing. That being said, too, with the map that you just showed me, well, I think it's fantastic. It looks like it only lists the sharps, which if you want a little bit extra work, you can write the flats that they correlate to. So D sharp is the same as E flat. Sharps tend to be a more guitar mindset. Flats tend to be more of a horn mindset. We'll talk more about why that is at another time. But it's very common that sharps are used in that kind of context, but flats are equally important. And so I would actually argue more important than sharps, but that's a whole nother day. So that's great. We'll try to include that, a link to that in this recording and everything. So any other questions at all?
Oh, just another thing. I just, it was helpful for me for some of those chord forms that were more difficult to play it on a soprano versus a tenor. There just wasn't the stretch. So
yeah, especially
kind
like
of switching off.
Chord, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is a bit of a beast. And so playing on a smaller ukulele absolutely makes it all easier because you're at a smaller form factor now. There's much less of a stretch for those fingers. And it's okay to do that, especially because you can move from the smaller instrument up to the larger one. In fact, I think it's a faster way to learn it on a smaller one and then move up to a larger one instead of just struggling with the larger one the whole way. It's kind of like lifting weights or something. If you're trying to, bench press 250 pounds, it's just not going to happen. You got to start somewhere and work your way up, right? So cool. Were there any other questions at all or comments? Yeah.
One for me. So when we're available to see the video of this, and we have questions later on, I mean, where should we kind of write them to, or is there a spot that we could maybe write a question to?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think we need to work out some sort of something with the UKC to kind of have like an email set up for this or something, which I think will be great. In the meantime, though, in the next session, where we'll be talking about the next steps of chord theory, it'll be perfect to kind of ask questions you might have from this session at the beginning of that session or the other sessions to come. But certainly when we're done with this quarter, it'll be nice to be able to ask your questions and see something answered. So stay tuned. We'll have an email or something for you guys. So awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I hope I didn't overwhelm you too much with chord theory because I know it can be anxiety inducing, and just hang on to that one little thing and you'll have it, I promise. And so thank you guys so much, and I'll talk to you soon. La 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 la.